We're speaking with Alex Haley on this edition of Black on Black. He's the author of Roots, the saga of an American family. Mr. Haley, your grandmother, I guess, was the inspiration to the research that eventually led to this book. How, well, let's put it this way. You also mentioned earlier that you older women come up to you and say, thank you for giving us back our history. Will this book rekindle a respect for our neglected senior citizens, so to speak?
I am so grateful to you, brother, for having asked me that, because I had a note right here that I don't care what you all asked me to get this in. Now here, I think that if we as a people have any priority thing we need to start doing as a whole, and it's not just we black people, it just happens to be particularly we, anybody, everybody it applies to, but one of the things in this country we need to start doing en masse is going to the oldest people in our families, sitting down and querying them to tell us what is in their heads, what's in their memories about our families. Many, many, many of us have people who sit right there, and we just never in our pell-mell technological push-button world think to go back and ask grandma, ask great aunt, ask great uncle or grandfather what do they know. They can very often take you back 2, 3 generations in your family, and you just never bother to ask. I've seen that happen with my own eyes, you know, and it exists by the tens of thousands among our families. So that's the first thing, is go to them and ask them to tell us. And then you record. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate, but just make a little document of all you can find about your family. And the moment that physical document exists, it ends for, in your family, the thing that has plagued us from the time of the ship's arrival. We never have known who we were, from whence we came, the source of us. And this is not just us, it's white people as well. Now the other thing that applies to us and anybody else is, I think in this country, we need very much to start holding family reunions. We need to gather together, all of us who are related by blood or marriage into bloodlines, whichever way, and bring them together at periodic intervals, annually, semi-annually, anyway, every 2 years anyway. There's something that happens when a group of individuals come together for the express purpose of being together because of a blood bond. When they do so, and when you finally, after the mingling, get together and sit down, those 2 oldest or the 4 oldest in the center, they're wriggling little babies on their laps in the, what do you call diapers nowadays? Pampers. Yeah, all them things in their laps, and all the other people lined up behind them, and the photographer takes a picture. Man, that is a magic moment. And once that is done, that everybody there walks away a little taller, and it makes a bond, a clan of what previously had been just loose people. We need to do that. Now to get to your question. My grandma was a treasure, as I'm sure all of yours others. I'm particularly partial to grandparents. You can love your mama, you can love your daddy, but there's something about a grandmother, there's something about a grandfather that nobody can equal what they can mean to a child. It's magic, it's mystic. And I think that in the case of my grandmother, she just happened to give me the story she knew, and that was the seed, the genesis of this book. I was later able to document things that she had told me sitting on her front porch in Henning, Tennessee, and she told me about things that had come down slave generations. And I was later able to go and find literal documents proving what she had said. As I was saying somewhere last evening, it wasn't that I hadn't believed my grandma, because you did not believe my grandma, but there was something about finding documents in the National Archives on microfilm in the official records of the United States that just galvanized me, and that was what sort of motivated me on this story.
Mr. Haley, I feel that your book also, Roots, also effectively dispels another rumor, and that is that historically blacks have been against blacks, brother against brother, because there were some blacks that sold others into slavery or helped whites to capture them. However, in Roots we find that these people were most hated by other Africans. In your research, did you know what percentage of blacks were doing this sort of thing, that it wasn't widespread?
It was widespread. It was extremely widespread that blacks helped in the capture of other blacks. As a matter of fact, there were areas in which it was almost an enclave thing, where fights occurred for the right to do it, you know, the areas in which it would be done. what I seem to see, the perspective in which I seem to see it, is not so much just blacks doing this, but it goes to something that you can find evidences of, manifestations of on broad scales, all back through recorded history. It seems to me to be a flaw within mankind, mankind's capacity for cruelty to his fellow men.
And greed.
And greed and lust and avarice and all the things that go with it. And you know, I've thought about a very modern, contemporary, similar situation. Is right in Cleveland, right in Detroit, right in Baltimore, every city in this country, we have the thing right now of people of the same kind selling hard dope to other people of their kind, and that is another form of slavery, as surely as chains were put around somebody's neck to hook them on this stuff. And the worst part of it, mind you, is not that it's done, but that the communities within which it's done tolerate it. You see, if it were not tolerated, it could be wiped out in a week, if it were not accepted as such. And this is just another manifestation of how people enslave their fellow men.
In fact, there was slavery among the African nations themselves.
Oh, yes.
But it was slavery of another kind. Would you
Slavery
describe
within
it?
Africa, in loose terms, would equate with what we today here now know as sharecropping. About that. If you owned a slave, you were responsible for that slave's, you know, shelter, food, upbringing, whatever, you know, and that was the general pattern of African slavery.
Mr. Haley, could I ask you something about Africa today? By the time this program is broadcast, you will have met with the Secretary of State, and you will have discussed Africa with him. Could you tell us generally what you would say about American foreign policy toward Africa today?
Well, I think my impression, and I really don't know a great deal about it, but my impression at this point is that we are just now entering a real active interest in doing something about African situation within American foreign policy. That's my image of it. As I understand it, this is the first time that there has been any real, you know, the Secretary of State has been taking personal intervention steps in things happening within Africa. So I'm really not too informed. I expect to learn more than I will contribute when I have this meeting, to tell you the truth. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Haley, I understand that you bought land in Africa where your ancestors are from. What do you plan to do with this land?
My brothers and I, George and Julius, with me, have bought the area of land surrounding the village of Juffure, where we found the village we found our forebear had come from. And what we propose to do with it is simply make of it a Kinte Memorial Park. His name was Kunta Kinte. And we wanted to do something special. The people there are Muslim of religion. We are Methodists, but we decided we wanted to do something useful, valuable to them. And finally we decided that we would build a mosque for them and other villages adjacent to worship in. And as the good Lord would have it, or Allah, as they would say, would have it, it turns out that of the three brothers of us who are the seventh generation from Kunta Kinte, the youngest of us, Julius, is an architect. And he is going over to design and build this mosque.
A moment ago, you were telling a very interesting story about a psychic experience that you had that enabled you to complete your work undisturbed. Have you ever thought of the consequences of the hundreds of thousands of dollars and all of the friends that you have, what they would be missing had you gone and take that fatal step that you were contemplating? You know, you have perhaps the largest commercial undertaking that any black person in America has ever had. The financial bottom line on this might be equated close to $15 to $20 million. You're talking about a $12 million TV series, 200,000 books at $12.50 a copy in the first printing, dealt with the paperback rights. I understand at the time of your experience you were $50,000 in hock. Miss Wallace of the Reader's Digest family was supporting you to the extent that she enabled you with your travels, and she supported you monthly. What would have happened to this huge commercial venture? It would have stopped, would it not? Do you see anyone else in America, a black writer of any scope, who would have carried on in your stead?
You know, it's funny, when you were listing all those figures, I just had to look at my wallet. And in there at this moment is $34. I must get the rest of this together here. Anyway, yes, it is true. The book is very, very financially successful. I hear a lot of talk about this, and I have to say I'm just not very hung up financially. You know, my big thing is now I know I won't have to worry about the rent again and things like that, not likely. And I'm going to get my backyard fixed up pretty and get me a good stereo set. Now, that's my ambitions right at the moment. But anyway, yes, I have thought about that now, this period of time. I'm just saying that at that time, you see, it's so, you know, since so sweet now with all these nice things happening. But man, at that time, it was just terrible. I mean, I owed everybody in the world, it seemed. It feels that way. You know, when you get debts from people and they send you letters, the first one says, tie a little string around your finger. And number 10 letter says, you so-and-so, when we catch you, so-and-so. Well, everything I owed was at number 10 stage or beyond. And it was just that wherever I turned, it seemed I was being pursued or harassed or something. And at that time, I suppose it was just a sense of escapism. Now, as you say, it would have been a shame. It worked out. But at that time, I didn't know it was going to work out so well. Even the writing, even though I had the research done, the writing became a formidable, mountainous challenge. I mean, all of you write. And you know how tough it is, say, to write something even short. Now, here I am faced with a mountainous book whose challenges became almost physical to me in a way. There are parts of this book which were rewritten 10, 12 times. I remember there's one particular chapter in there, I always like it, because I wrote that chapter under great pressure in literally one night between dinner and breakfast. It's the chapter where Chicken George returned from England and went back to his master's run-down home, and the master was run down. And I had originally intended to write that by having him come back to his family and do that scene with the master in flashback with him telling it to his family. But then I felt that wasn't right. We needed to see that scene. And as it turned out in the film, that's a very heavy scene, as him coming back. Chicken George in the film is Ben Vereen. Marcel Lee is is Connors. And that scene is fantastic, you know. And now I'm just glad it worked out. I'm just saying that at that time, it almost didn't.
Assuming you write a book about the book, what do you contemplate the bottom line to be? Total.
What do you mean, bottom line?
The bottom line, the financial bottom line, the commercial part of the enterprise.
You know, to tell you the truth, this may sound funny. I almost never think about that. Somebody was asking me the other day, did I know how to read a royalty sheet? And I said, well, really, to tell you the truth, I don't. I just look at the bottom figure. And it's the truth. And I have agents who worry about those kind of things. And I somehow am just not that money-oriented. I really do. I'm concerned about the next book, the next thing. Like I know my immediate next book is going to be a book I'm going to see right as soon as I finish this tour. I'm going to Yokohama on a ship. And they talk about a slow boat to China. I'm going to take a slow boat to Japan, you know, and work on my next book, which is my search for roots. It tells the detective story of how this book was put together.
Mr. Haley, could I ask you very briefly about your first book that I read by you, the autobiography of Malcolm X? Yeah. The question I think that a lot of us want to know, do you have an insight into why Malcolm X was killed?
Not really, not any more than you. I just know, obviously, there were people who sought his life, and not just one group, other groups. I mean, there were several groups that sought his life, and I'm often asked that, but I really don't know who, if that's the question, was instrumental in it. I don't think anyone does.
I must interrupt. We are all out of time. We could go on talking to you for hours, but unfortunately time waits for no man. Alex Haley, the author of Roots, has been our guest on this edition of Black on Black. We want to thank him for being with us and also want to thank our panel. And join us again 2 weeks from this date for another edition of Black on Black.
This has been a public affairs presentation of Scripps Howard Broadcasting Company, WEWS, in association with WGPR-TV.